And now we're down to the finish line, which is the most fun part of all, putting all of this together. Starting off with the Mad Hatter, one of the things you'll be seeing me do on each and every one of these cards is I will be trimming down the background to allow for a 1/4 inch allowance on each side. So that ends up being cutting down to 3 3/4 of an inch on the short side and 5 inches on the long side. And in some cases, I do some additional stamping directly on the background. In some cases, I don't. Now, for the Mad Hatter, there is this really funny little sentiment that I adore. I think it'd also be perfect for the Joker, actually, but this is Mad Hatter card, and it says "ha ha 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 ha" or something like that. Anyway, just being silly, so don't mind me. I had to re-record this video because after doing all the voiceover, I realized that I had my microphone muted, so I'm having to do this a second time. Just bear with me. I will get right back on track here. As you can see, I'm pulling out some additional words out of the stamp set, and I'm not being too particular about where I'm placing them as far as where they're going to go on this piece of white cardstock, because each and every word will get trimmed out individually before it is placed on the card. So it's not real important how they're lined up at this point. And what I'll end up doing is I'll show you how I'm trimming them down, but I don't show you this on every card because that would get incredibly repetitive and boring. So I will only show this on screen this one time as far as what I did when stamping these out and trimming them down further. I do use some detail scissors in order to trim them down, fairly close to the box that's on around each word, but I'm not being very particular at all about how straight they are, how exact they are, because often these boxes aren't even exactly straight themselves, and it's just kind of part of the overall design. So I'm using some liquid glue to attach the background to the card base. And by the way, this is Gina K cardstock. It is jelly bean green, and it is a perfect color for this particular card. It goes very well with that twisted citron ink, I think anyway. You could use any cardstock, whether it's purple or something else that you think you have in your stash that matches. So I'm taking the words and I'm going to put onto the front of the card, and I will be doing some additional stamping on the inside, so there is something there as well. I'm just kind of getting an idea of where I want these words to go before I glue them on, and just using some liquid adhesive, as that allows me a little bit of time to make minor adjustments once I have set those down. And now, moving on to the inside of the card, where I'm just pulling out some of the words that are going to make up the sentiment on the inside. It's going to be a little bit hard to see how they read until I actually stamp them. And you can see that stray piece of acetate that just jumped in the MISTI and yanked out all the stamps that recovered from that. I have them back in. We're going to move on. As you can see on the colored cardstock, you really have to stamp this twice or you will not be able to read this. And I love this. It says, "You're entirely bonkers. All the best people are," on the inside. What a perfect sentiment. Any case, now moving on to the always fun Cheshire Cat. Trim down the background. Then, in this case, there are a few stamps that I am going to put directly on this background as well. So I'm pulling out the little fish bones, the face, well, just the eyes and the teeth. And this other little stamp that looks like a little scratch mark, excuse me, from the claws of the cat. So I'm just temporarily placing the cat down in the background so I have a good idea of where I want the stamps to go. Using my archival ink and watering can, and I will stamp this twice just to get a darker impression. And for the sentiment on the outside of the card, I'm going to use the sentiment that says "We're all mad here." I will stamp that down on white cardstock. And another thing I will be doing on this one is stamping on the inside. But first, here we go with the sentiment that's going on the outside. Instead of cutting down this piece of cardstock that I'm stamping onto, and this is just not a stray piece, I guess a spare piece of white cardstock that was sitting around from other projects that I had done, I'm just going to fussy cut around this, and I will pop that up on foam as well as the cat before putting this together. And I will be adding some stamps or a phrase on the inside of it, and you'll see what it is as soon as I get it stamped down on there. And like with the other card, have to stamp it twice so you can see it. It's going to say which way you go depends on where you want to be. And with that, I'm going to put everything together. Background, Cheshire Cat, the sentiment, and now that card is complete. Next on the list, the White Rabbit. Yes, one of my favorite ones. Have you decided which is your favorite so far? This is definitely one of mine. In any case, going to be doing some stamping directly in the background too. And one of the really fun things about the stamp set is it includes the set of numbers. So even if you're not making White Rabbit cards, these numbers would be incredibly useful for another project where you just want to stamp numbers and have nothing at all to do with Alice in Wonderland or the White Rabbit, etc. But one of the fun things about the stencil and these numbers is the stencil itself is called Time Tunnel, and it's just perfect, especially for the White Rabbit. You could place the numbers going in any which direction you want. You could put fewer of them on or more of them on. It's just kind of up to you how you want to make your final project look. And I'm stamping twice because I want a more solid image, and that is just perfection. So now I'm stamping the words that are going to be going on the outside of the card, and I will trim those off camera. And this time I'm going to show you what is an alternative to using a colored card base. I ended up thinking I was going to use red, but the shade I had in my stash was not the right color, and this piece of blue cardstock I happened to find in my stash somewhere was much better. It looks almost identical to the Simon Says Stamp Island Blue cardstock, which is the actual card base I had used when I was first putting samples together in advance of filming this video. And so since this is the second time I'm putting all these cards together, I wanted to show some alternatives in case you don't want to use a solid colored cardstock for your cards, or you just don't have it, or whatever your reasons may be. The way I'm doing this one, and we'll do one or two more like this, is an alternative instead. So I'm going to be doing pretty much the same thing in regard to the card base and the colored layer background underneath the stenciled layer. And this stenciled background was already trimmed down just like the other ones I've done before it. I've stamped on some of the images from the Alice in Wonderland set. And now I'm pulling out the words that I'm going to add to the front of this card. I'm just getting those lined up, ready to go. And after those are stamped, I will trim them out to go on the outside of the card. And then I will be showing you where I'm stamping the inside of this white card base. So I kind of skipped ahead there and just showing you the same process, just going a little bit faster because some of this really gets repetitive from one card to the next. So again, just adding all the words that I want to put on the front where it says, "This morning I knew who I was," and on the inside of the card it says, "But I've changed a few times since then." Yeah, I know the feeling. So now we're down to the last few cards, and I'm going to be speeding this along a bit since by now you've gotten used to my routine of trimming down the background. And in these last few cases, I'm not doing any stamping directly onto the backgrounds, or at least I don't think so. And on this sentiment, one of the changes I've made from every other card is I'm using Distress Oxide, the Candied Apple Red, which is the same color that done on the background, is going to be used on that one word. And this is the inside sentiment, so it's going to read, "Treat me like a queen or else." Love it. As you can see, as I'm putting on the word queen on the bottom, I did just put some of the foam adhesive tape just on the end of it, using liquid adhesive for the part that's going over the skirt. And the inside of the card is already done. Now I'm moving on to the caterpillar, and one of the modifications I made, since the Scan and Cut did not cut out this inside section, and I believe there is a way to control the settings so that it does this, but I didn't want to fiddle with it since I was cutting so many images at one time. So I'm just using my detail scissors, and I'm going to fussy cut the inside of it so that it is more of the background will be visible instead of all that white space that's in between the caterpillar and the hookah. And once that's done, I'm going to add foam adhesive tape to both the mushroom as well as the caterpillar. And I'm going to need to leave a little bit of space at the bottom to make that work right, but you'll see what I mean in a moment. So now that I've trimmed down the background, I'm adding a piece of yellow cardstock, and I'm putting it on a white cardstock base instead of using a colored one. On the original card, I did use Simon's stamp Bright. I think Bright Sunshine is the color. Again, you can refer to the materials supply list to see the exact colors if you want to, as far as what I originally used versus the substitutions I'm making on this round of cards. So like I said earlier, I'm putting the foam tape on the back of the mushroom, putting that down on the base of the card, and I left some space at the bottom of the caterpillar and hookah lamp to add some liquid adhesive so that it would line up just right and allow the bottom of the caterpillar to sit on top of the mushroom cap. And with that said, I'm adding some liquid adhesive like I've done on all the other cards, and just adding the little sentiment strips in various places on the card. And in this case, I did need to go back and add a piece of foam adhesive tape under that last little sentiment strip. So now we're at almost the end and working on the very last card for this series. So I hope that you've really enjoyed watching this all come together and are inspired by what you saw. Whether or not you buy this exact set or some of the stamps or not, I hope that some of the tips that I have shared with you throughout the process will come in handy, even if you don't do this exact project. So indeed, the tips I shared on the backgrounds can apply to a lot of different stencils, especially where you want to do more than one color on a particular stencil. Those little brushes and tiny sponge daubers can go a long way to giving you more control over the color that you put onto a stencil background. So maybe if nothing else, that's one key thing you've learned from this series. I thank you very much for joining me. So we're going to take one final look at all the different cards created in this series. I hope that you will join me for the next class when I do announce that. In the meantime, take care and get your craft on.